Welcome to the Omega Podcast. My name is Keenan Thomas, and I am the founder of Omega. In this episode of the Omega Podcast, we have a unique conversation on the Rewired Brain. Covered in this podcast is a clear framework to reframe negative behavioral patterns, overcome innate fears, and process the addiction to our emotions and finding a way to connect with our best self. Dr. Chilton is well known for his scientific publications and his extensive research on COVID and studied enzymes. Let's listen to this inspirational conversation. Welcome to the Omega Author Talks with Dr. Chilton. He is a full professor and director of the Center for Precision and Wellness at the University of Arizona, with over 160 scientific publications, an entrepreneur starting 5 companies and 1 nonprofit organization, an inventor holding over 25 patents, and an author publishing 5 books, including Inflammation, Nation, and The Rewired Brain. Dr. Chilton, it's a pleasure to have you.
Keenan, it is so wonderful to be with you. Please call me Ski, because this is going to be a great conversation and we're friends. So it's so nice to be with you.
Absolutely, Ski. Your book offered a clear framework for understanding our brains and the decisions we make, showing how certain fears and instincts drive unhealthy emotional dysfunctions and related behavioral patterns in the most important areas of our lives. This book shows how to reframe negative experiences, experience emotional and spiritual healing, and ultimately rewire our brains, empowering us to live fearlessly. What inspired you to write The Rewired Brain?
You know, Keenan, I'm a scientist in my day job and had written books like Inflammation Nation and the Gene Smart Diet and Win the War Within. And again, these were around my science. But kind of in the middle to later 40s, I really started struggling with this issue of why I was making certain decisions I was making. Why, for example, was I spending time in Africa and Darfur and the Nuba Mountains and saving people all over the world? And why did I often hurt the people I love the most? And it really, I'm the type of person that needs to understand. So I went back to Wake Forest University, where I was a professor and School of Philosophy in Religion. And I studied the issue of free will for a year and whether humans actually have it. And it really wasn't kind of an academic pursuit whether humans had it. The real question for me is whether I had it.
Yes, and I think that that's so critical that you made those self-reflections and you're able to add a lot of those life experiences throughout the book. And I'm so grateful because throughout the book, I was reading it and taking notes and I was like, wow, I can relate to some of these areas within my own life. So I thank you for adding those occurrences and making it so applicable to just the everyday person. You discuss also in the book that there's a system 1 and system 2 part of our brain, which is kind of a division, which is in constant strife with each other. As you discussed, our system 1 is a perpetually controlled by our unconscious fears and instincts and is highly influenced by experiences from our childhood and environmental factors. While the second force or systems 2 is an entirely different role tied to survival and happiness. Should these 2 systems always be balanced in our lives?
Well, the problem, Keenan, is they're not balanced. For most of us, we're asleep. We're completely asleep. And we need to wake up. And so there's this very primitive portion of our brains that we share with the entire animal kingdom. I call it our lizard brain. It really is this part of the brain that remembers things that have happened to us, is there to prevent us from being destroyed. It's there to prevent us from getting kicked out of the tribe. It's there to ensure our survival so that we can pass our genes to the next generation. And that is primacy. That's system one. That's our amygdala. That's our limbic system. It remembers childhood traumas, those childhood traumas that hurt us so badly. It can't forget them. It remembers parent-child attachments. It remembers devastating relationships and transfers them to the next generation. It remembers, for me, the opposite of love is not evil. The opposite of love is fear. And fear gives rise to all evils. So again, the idea here is this part of us is so critical. I just gave a diversity talk, and again, why do we have implicit bias? Well, people who are different from our tribe, our primitive portions of our brain are saying they're different. They're trying to take our supplies. They're trying to take our food. They're trying to take us. And again, 85 to 90% of our feelings and emotions are coming from that part of the brain, and they're rising up, and system 2 senses them. System 2 is going, oh my gosh, did you hear that? Wow, am I in trouble? Wow, is this a fearful situation? Wow, I was in that relationship, and wow, that person did that to me, and I'm in a new one. Guess what? They just did the same. They're just like that other one. So it's devastating our lives. We're living with a script. We're living a script that's created by the system 1 mind. And again, we're not awake. And we feel the emotions, we feel the fears, and they give rise to thousands of conscious thoughts. And those conscious thoughts in system 2 are dominating. So there is no balance. For the vast majority of humans, there is no balance. And again, in the book, if I had a regret, I wish I had referred more of system 1 to the unconscious mind, system 2 to the conscious mind. Again, I made it a little more complex than perhaps I should have. But again, system 1 is unconscious, and it is based on fear, and it is designed to protect us and procreate our genes. System 2 is our frontal cortex. It's there. It can look at situations. It can calculate odds. But that's a lot more. That takes a lot more energy. System 1 is happening in milliseconds. System 2 is happening in seconds. So we're sitting there and we're feeling all this, and our conscious is going, I can't deal with all that. I can't make these calculations. I can't tell what's real or not real. So I have to default to my feelings, to my emotions, and the thoughts that come with those.
Absolutely. And the influx of emotions is not particularly easy to manage or even figure out in real time, because you have so many things coming up against you. You have the external factors, internal, how you feel against, whatever you're up against, and learning how to make the right decision in that time. Sometimes many people do it out of fear, unfortunately. But in your book, you talk a bit about brain plasticity. How have you been able to break down brain plasticity to your particular advantage?
I think with system 1, I've just written a new model of moral development, and the thing that is critical, we used to think the brain, you got the brain you got when you were a baby. And we used to think with genetics and genomics, you got the DNA code that you got when you were a baby. Now, what we now know is that, I remember when we uncovered the human genome, we said, man, we're going to predict 95% of diseases, emotional problems. I think we're at about 6% right now. Now, the reason we're at 6% is there was this thing called epigenetics. And epigenetics could change our genes in real time. They can change our brain circuitry in real time. So if this conversation is meaningful to your readers, then this is changing DNA in the brain. It's to be specific, it's methylating CPG sites. That's changing the DNA, that's changing the expression of that DNA, and that's changing brain circuitry. So you want to change your life, change your thoughts. You want to change your life, change the way that you're reacting to these emotions. Because by the way that you consistently react, if you consistently react over and over the same way, you're only creating stronger circuitry. Again, I'm reminded of the Native American with the two wolves, and the boy says to the elder, you know, which is the good wolf or the bad wolf? Which one will win the fight? And the elder said, the one you feed the most. Who will win the fight for brain circuitry? The one you feed the most.
And learning to recognize that you need to reprogram your brain when you're in those consistent negative patterns. And part of it is, you know, having that self-directed learning simulation that you can be able to say, okay, I'm recognizing this pattern in my life that's leading to these negative repercussions and how I can be able to deviate from that. But for some, it's a very challenging thing because it could be inherent through parents, through DNA, and you might be the only person within your family line that's stepping out in a new direction that might be different from those around you. So what are some transformational ways individuals can start to learn to rewire themselves of thought patterns that are negative? What's sort of the starting phase of recognizing it?
Such a good question, because I'm going to admit something. When I finished the Rewired Brain, I was at a book signing, and a woman came up to me and she asked me essentially the same question. She said, I hate you. And I said, wow, that's pretty strong. And she said, I hate you because you told me in no uncertain terms why I was so messed up, but you didn't provide me a solution. And it was such a great comment, because now my agent has a new book called There Is Another Way to Happiness. I have another book that I've written with an individual called, or a proposal called Learning to Live Like You're Dying, or I'm working on that one now. But the idea is there are two yous in you. So there's the I, which I call System 2. That's where System 2 resides. And there is the me, which is System 1. Now, the me is causing all the problems. I mean, unfortunately, you know, I live in a community, Tucson, Arizona, where we have a lot of homeless people. And it's so sad. But I often am driving down the road and I'm watching them talk to them. I mean, I am watching them shouting, going crazy, talking to themselves. And I'm looking at them, and I have understood that they're not crazy. They're no different than me. The same thing is going on in my brain. I'm just not articulating it. So the issue really is, how does the I observe the me? How does the I learn to observe the me? How does the I become aware of the me? Now, in my religious tradition, Christianity, Christ says we must die to ourselves. What I think he's saying is we must die to System 1. Paul in Romans 12 in my faith tradition goes, I don't know why in the world I keep doing these bad things, but I do. I want to be spiritual. I want to do the right thing. But why do I? You know, and woe is me. But the issue is we do. For me, I'm on a 6-year meditation journey, and I've developed a new meditation technique called CAST. And what essentially that meditation technique is the first thing you do is you realize there's two yous in you. There's one who can listen and observe. Again, in my faith tradition, we might call that the Holy Spirit. In Buddhism, you might call it your Buddha nature. In Christianity, your Christ-like nature. But that is the observer. Again, that connects to divinity. That's the observer. The observer is watching the troublemaker. He's watching the troublemaker, and only until you can understand these two entities and you can move outside of yourself, whether it's meditation, again, after 6 years, I can walk across the campus here at the University of Arizona and I'm going, wow, I keep having that thought. Where in the world is that coming? Why would I keep having that thought? Because the observer together with curiosity, you asking yourself, why does that keep coming up? Why do I keep feeling that way about that person? Why am I so angry about that? Until you can begin to wake up and become aware and be the observer of your system one, you have no chance to change it. Then you have the chance to change it, because the A in CAST is awareness. The S in CAST is surrender. So you become aware. There are certain things, there are certain childhood traumas, and there's a few people in my life who had such neglect, such childhood traumas, that it's really difficult to overcome those, because the system one was so neglected, and it's coming back into adulthood. There's some of these that you just can't observe and make go away. Again, I'll use a 12-step, term, surrendering to a higher power as you see that, but you're surrendering those things that are unsurrenderable. I don't even know if that's a word. And then you trust. So for me, it's a very important process, but somehow you've got to slow down and let the observer observe the me, the troublemaker, the fear, the evil that comes out of that fear. And I do believe, and again, not to get too spiritual, but I think my true self is observing my false self, or as Carl Jung called it, my shadow self. My true self is observing my shadow self. It doesn't want to be that way. And that allows me to connect to the divine. That true self, again, in my faith tradition, the Holy Spirit, in Buddhism, the Buddha nature, that allows me to observe, and it allows me to connect to divinity.
Absolutely. And I love how you discuss having honesty and being able to surrender. And you definitely discuss that in the final chapters of your book, being able to have that direct reflection as if you're looking at yourself in the mirror and being able to say, I don't have it all together. And yet there's still areas for improvements, but having that hope to see that there is a brighter day, a better chance if you take those necessary steps to observe those negative thought patterns, those negative behaviors, and being able to say, okay, if I take this first step, there's an opportunity that I can be able to overcome it. But why do you think, for instance, in the essence of forgiveness, that people struggle in that area? That people find that I'm going to hold this grudge, against my manager, against my boss, against, whoever it is for the rest of their lives, and never have the willpower to say, I'm going to give it up. I'm going to release it, and I'm going to move forward. Why do you find that to be a significant challenge?
A huge part of system one, or the unconscious self, is the egoic self. Mm. We spend our lives building up these egos, these massive egos. And in writing my book proposal for my latest book, There Is Another Way to Happiness, I remember going through it, and I remember, I conveyed a story of, at Wake Forest University, the dean said, I want you to show these visiting professors around. And I remember showing them around, and I remember I came out in a house without a bathroom in the Appalachian Mountains. I really did. So I remember telling them this rags to riches story and how I got to Johns Hopkins, how I did this, how I did that. And I just remember my observer going, I don't like that guy. I'm really getting sick of that guy. That guy is just a big old braggart. And I remember stopping in the middle of the conversation and looking at them and going, everything I said was a lie. The facts were not a lie, but this rags to riches dragon slayer, that's all a lie. I said, I don't know how in the world I got here. I don't know how in the world all this happened. I don't know how I came out of that 8-acre tobacco farm in the Appalachia. I don't know how I got here. As far as I'm concerned, it's all a miracle. Now, again, those egoic selves, we're driven. How much money you make? What's your car? What's this? What this? These egoic selves, they don't want to let go to forgive. They don't want to let go. If you're holding something over someone, you're holding power. That egoic self that's part of System 1 wants to have power over another person. You're not going to forgive that other person. Again, in my tradition, the splinter in someone else's eye and the log in yours. I mean, that is humility. That is humility of saying, wow, you know what? I better forgive that person because this dang log in my eye, if there's a balance, in the next life, that's not gonna be too good on me. But that egoic self wants to hold on to it. System 1 wants to hold on to it because System 1 loves control because it hates fear. And if you can control someone, then you won't be fearful of them. You won't forgive them because it's part of your egoic self. It's part of the story. We believe the stories we tell ourselves. That's the scariest thing in the world is we believe and put into our System 1 the stories we tell ourselves.
And that story that you consistently replay is how you begin to move. It's going to change your relationships. I mean, it's like a ripple effect in the pond. If you're not conscious of how you view yourself, how you view others, it's just going to become this messy situation. And after research with Dr. Rustelis, you guys examined the two systems, but you also state that humans are unconsciously controlled by fear and not faith within themselves, and it kind of goes back to that consistent story that we tell ourselves. Why is that people consistently I would like to say play the victim and not try to look at themselves as being triumphant or slaying their dragons?
I'm going to say something, it may be controversial, but victimhood is dangerous. Victimhood may be among the most dangerous things that human can do to themselves. Because victimhood builds on itself. Victimhood builds, that's so sad that Ski's endured 2 cancers. And I have, but I give myself 24 hours before. Oh, that's so sad. That's really sad. And our egoic selves loves that. It loves that. It's going, oh, they feel sorry for me, man. They love me. Wow. And so it builds on itself and it becomes a habit. But I heard one of my favorite writers, David Hawkins, say, take one step too far toward victimhood and you'll never return. So be really, really careful about victimhood, because victimhood is the opposite of what you think it is. It's building your egoic self. It's building the ego. So be really, and it's a fast forward loop. Now, what that would be in science term is every time I'm the victim, I'm building I'm epigenetically wiring my brain, and I'm building brain circuitry to be the victim. So I think that was what Hawkins was saying. He wasn't saying it in scientific terms, but I'm saying it in scientific terms. Take one step too many, wire your brain enough in that area, and you're a victim forever. So be careful. Readers, be careful with victimhood. Victimhood is a very dangerous thing.
Any final remarks or anything that you would like to leave our listeners or viewers with?
There is a life of happiness. There is a life of joy that's available no matter what your situation. And in fact, for most people, the only way you get to this point, the only way, the door to this point is intense pain. So, I wanted to call my last book proposal, or the one I'm working on, "Congratulations, you have cancer," but they won't let me. Mm-hmm. But the door to your joy, the door to your happiness, we're addicted. We're addicted just as if it were any drug. We're addicted to our emotions. Unless we hit bottom, when we hit bottom, again, to use an AA, when we're sick and tired of being sick and tired, we look for another way. And there is another way. There really is another way. You don't have to be a captive. If you wake up, you don't have to be a captive to this very primitive 60 million year old primitive brain, that's lizard brain that's sitting inside your head. You do not have to be a captive to that, and you can connect with the divine.
Thank you so much, Dr. Chilton, for your wisdom, your intelligence, and just for being able to break down such an incredible book. And for those of you that are out there listening or watching us, go and get that book, Dr. Chilton's The Rewired Brain. It's on Amazon as well as Barnes & Noble. And thank you for being on the Omega Author Talks.